Welcome everybody to this second episode of Marketing in the Age of COVID-19 from Microwave Journal and Signal Integrity Journal. In the first episode, we looked at pivoting the company to survive a pandemic. And in this episode, we're going to cover messaging in uncertain and sensitive times. We have three expert guests with us from the industry today to help me cover this subject. We have Stephanie Georges, the Chief Marketing Officer at Mercury Systems, Vanessa Boynton, Account Director at Matter Communications, and Jill Searl, the Account Manager also at Matter Communications. Welcome, everybody. Vanessa, what have you been advising companies to do regarding messaging since COVID-19 hit the U.S.?
The first priority has been making sure that stakeholders for any brand are well informed. Much of the messaging work we've done in the last couple of months has been focused on hitting the right cadence, the right tone, the right level of detail, so employees, customers, investors, partners are crystal clear on what's happening with the business, what steps leadership is taking to preserve everyone's safety and livelihoods, and what adjustments are the business is making to not only remain healthy throughout the crisis, but beyond it. Furthermore, we've been challenging companies to re-examine their messaging generally. We've known for some time that millennials and younger generations prefer to align with brands that are interested in supporting people, supporting communities, supporting causes. There have been remarkable instances of collaboration between individuals, businesses, and industries in the last few weeks. So the question becomes, is this what you can be going forward, not just in times of crisis, but always?
Jill, how have companies worked with you to adjust their messaging in this environment?
Well, we've been working with a lot of companies to adjust both their external and internal messages during this time. We know that in both instances, it's important to be sensitive to everything that's going on in the world. And the messages that you convey to the public as well as your internal stakeholders are really important to your brand, more so than ever. So we've been working with our clients to share their positive response to the current crisis, but in a responsible and authentic way. Companies from a wide range of industries, technology, retail, consumer, have pivoted their day-to-day operations to focus on providing resources and knowledge that's helping support the relief efforts. For one example, one of our clients reoriented their business to help resellers that were slammed by Amazon's recent reprioritizing of essential goods. So we worked with them and we secured interest with several trade publications and even the Wall Street Journal to tell this story. We've also been advising our clients, on the regular type of things like press announcements, media pitches, sales promotions, social media content, just to be sure that these messages are delivered with the right cadence and reflect the right tone. And of course, it's equally important to keep your employees informed, engaged, and then focused on the next steps. So that's why we've helped review internal messaging and communication plans for our clients. This can include things like crafting internal messaging points for their leadership, employee letters. Recently, we have a client that was deemed an essential business. So we worked with them on sharing with their employees. This included crafting internal messaging points and employee letters for a client that was deemed an essential business. It was important for them to share with their employees why and how their work is impacting the greater community. So for the same client, we helped create a resource center for their stakeholders that included additional information on product availability, different procedures going on in their facility, and other important details.
Stephanie, we've been very impressed what Mercury Systems has been doing, communicating to the community itself and also to your employees. How has Mercury changed their messaging during these uncertain times?
Thanks, Pat. I really appreciate that, and thank you for having me here today. One of the things, and I love what both Vanessa and Jill said, really this idea of being well informed and that whole idea of authenticity and tone. But for us, it really started with our leadership team. So as soon as we really realized this was going to be our crisis as well as a global crisis, we assembled and created 4 goals. And at the center of those goals, we started with just keeping employees and all our stakeholders, frankly, safe. And that was sort of what guided us. It became our North Star. And then we proceeded, as you all know from being PR and marketing professionals, we started with a message grid, and we started by building a message grid, which was different and varied from the messages that we had been saying, but again, back to our core goals. And we evolved it as the situation evolved. So those messages started, and as we developed new policies and made new decisions, we evolved those messages, and we developed them and evolved them for all stakeholders. So we did them for investors, customers, and team members, and we used them as our guide. The other thing that we did, which I think is something that we'll continue to do, frankly, as a company, is we changed our cadence of communicating with employees. We found that our monthly and quarterly cadence of all hands and town halls was not enough. Things were changing. So we began a weekly meeting with our managers and actually created a feedback loop where we surveyed them immediately and got reactions and responses and started to change things based on that feedback. So those were probably the two biggest changes that we made.
Vanessa, what are the main sensitivities that you need to consider during these times?
Well, primarily you don't want to be seen as either trying to capitalize on tragedy or ignore it entirely. Maybe you do have, say, the perfect product for engaging workers remotely, or maybe your industry really isn't impacted that much by the pandemic, and so you want to maintain business as usual. Either way, putting out those messages the way you normally would will put you in the line of fire, and rightfully so. Your message just can't be about you anymore. It has to be about helping the people that support your business. If you have the perfect product, donate some of them to vulnerable communities. If you're unaffected by the pandemic, contribute time or resources to those that aren't. And you can still tell people about what you're doing too, but it should always come from a place of, here's how you can help us help them, not from a place of, look at how great we are.
Well said. Stephanie, I wanted to ask the same thing to you. What are the main sensitivities that you're considering in this time?
Well, I'm going to just draft off of Vanessa's response because it was spot on. We thankfully have had a strong commitment at Mercury to our cultures and values. And so we started with sort of consistency with our cultures and values, and those that we had already in place, as well as the purpose that we had recently kind of uncovered as a company around innovation that matters. So we even extended that, to Vanessa's point, into an external campaign, really kind of bringing our purpose into our messaging, not only internally but externally, and in an authentic way. So as I said earlier, the priority from the start for us was the safety of our employees. So we right away, early on in this pandemic, established a relief fund for employees. Even though our business, we were incredibly fortunate, and we recognized how fortunate we were. Our business hadn't been as affected as some others. We still had families that were affected, so we wanted to be leading from the front and anticipate their needs. So we stood up $1 million relief fund. We invited employees to gift their internal recognition points, kazoo points that we had, to healthcare workers. This was wildly popular with our employees. I mean, even we underestimated as the response team how much our employees wanted to give back to the communities. So we ended up, as of right now, over 1,600 medical professionals in our own communities have been recognized with gift cards from Mercury. And while that's a small token, it was just a way to engage our employees. The other thing I did starting to realize as a sensitivity even more is this has become an extended crisis, and people are burning out. And so we're realizing we need to be sensitive to that, and people's insecurities are frankly starting to show. It's a really tough dynamic, and they're even more accentuated, I think, in a crisis. particularly one that's attenuated like this one. So we're still early on in trying to sort through this as a company. But I think if I were to say what our most current area of focus is now is mental health and stress of our employees, particularly as this crisis seems to be going on for much longer than any of us had anticipated.
Vanessa, I think you covered some of this, but how are you recommending companies continue to PR and brand and market their products?
Well, it's good to let people know that you're still out there, that you're still healthy, that you're still innovating. Your customers are interested in hearing from you, as well as your stakeholders. And an increasing number of journalists are clamoring for normal, non-COVID news, especially as we approach a point where restrictions are being lifted. The trick is choosing the right combination of words and tone that acknowledges the situation, acknowledges the new challenges your customers may be facing as a result of what's going on, and explains how you can help them with those challenges now and in the future. And for the record, this doesn't mean that you have to email them 6 times a day with the message, "We're here for you." Everybody gets it at this point. But you do need to make yourself available to answer questions and let people know continuously what they can expect as next steps. You also have to be ready for things to take a little longer than usual. We're still not certain what's coming next, and people are extremely cautious about the solutions they're willing to invest in or the stories they're willing to write. So be flexible, be accommodating, and be patient.
Great. Jill, can you tell us what you're seeing in the market? Have companies adjusted their branding and marketing, or have they just continued as normal?
So we're really seeing a little bit of both here, Pat. It depends on the brand, really. For a lot of companies, especially in technology, it is business as somewhat usual. It just has a new format. So whether it's marketing new video content, webinars, offering more content online on their websites, hosting and attending virtual events, brands are definitely adjusting how they deliver their messages. We know that many companies rely on trade shows to generate leads and engage with their customers, but really events are at a standstill. Events into the fall are being canceled, postponed, moved to virtual. We heard just last week that IMS is going to take a virtual format in August. So these type of virtual events are a great way to still connect with your audience and expand your customer base. And I think that we'll even find that companies are continuing with this format long after the current crisis is over. The matter of fact is that there just isn't much that's normal about the current environment, and it is affecting marketing plans.
Stephanie, has the current environment changed the way that Mercury is branding the company and marketing their products?
We were in the process of actually rolling out an entirely new positioning and brand, and that we've been working on for the past, several months to almost a year. And in some ways, we've actually been able to accelerate that rollout. Certainly with recognition to what Vanessa said and what Jill added, we looked at our approach through the lens of sensitivity to the current situation. It was really important, clearly. But what happened was we really felt that it was consistent with our marketing strategy. We at Mercury were focused on building awareness. We want to grow our employer brand. We're in a hyper-growth situation, so we are hiring, and we felt that speaking through our purpose and through our culture and values kind of fit. Again, not being tone deaf to what was happening, but really kind of aligned with current environment. So we certainly evolved our approach, but I would say we've accelerated it. We are including a lot more tactics, and I think Jill mentioned this as well. For example, as we build a bridge to our next normal, we have very specific tactics around how to ensure we communicate with our employees through these changes. We are looking at trade shows and virtual events in a much different way. We actually have branded internally our effort the next HG, which is kind of a real inner geek of Mercury using the chemical element symbol. But it was our way of sort of saying, hey, you know what, we're Mercury, but it's different. So that's been, that's another example of how, we're changing our current environment and changed in our current environment, but really doing a lot of the same things.
Jill, what kinds of PR activities have you seen companies doing focused around the current environment?
So PR activities have definitely shifted, but it doesn't mean that companies and technology companies are ceasing communications. Around the current environment, we've seen a lot of media coverage around B2B and software companies offering services and upgrades at no cost to help organizations cope with the consequences of what's going on. And then in the last couple of weeks, I've really noticed a slew of funding announcements from startups focused on also providing solutions for the current environment. So there's definitely a lot of great PR activity. But I think it's important to just mention before you continue with any type of PR effort to really analyze the media landscape. Vanessa alluded to this earlier. Naturally, there are a lot of COVID-19 related articles that are dominating media across all verticals. Journalists are being flooded with coronavirus pitches. If you pulled up a handful of journalists' Twitter accounts today, you'd probably see, them, another coronavirus pitch. Early on, we even saw publishers pull reporters off of their typical beat just to keep up with these types of stories. Now the economy is slowly starting to open up, and we're seeing more and more that journalists and media outlets are hungry for the non-COVID news. But I think that it's still proceed with caution about your upcoming PR activities, whether they're COVID-19 related or not. You could ask your communications and agency teams to keep an eye on what key journalists are writing about, what companies are getting covered, what is the angle, what media outlets are focused solely on COVID-19, what other topics are being discussed. So we've been doing that sort of analysis weekly for all of our clients across almost every industry. And I think just in general, the key with your PR activities is to be sensitive to the times and just try not to come across as opportunistic.
Stephanie, we've noticed that Mercury has taken a very personal approach in their social media posting. They've been highlighting employee accomplishments and some personal situations. What led you to take this approach?
It really comes back to our culture and values. I'm probably going to sound like a broken record here, but Mark Aslett, our CEO, led years ago and owns sort of this commitment to our culture and values as well as our purpose. So we like to celebrate what our teams accomplish and solicit their input. And that's been sort of core to Mercury. I think especially now, as more and more people are working remotely, as more of our team members are working from remote locations, and there's a mix between our remote employees and our employees that are working in the office or in the facilities, it seemed more important than ever that we kind of connect them and find ways to do that virtually.
Can you give us a few examples of things that you've highlighted? Because I know you've had some really good ones.
Yeah, I mean, we launched something called Mercury Moments, which was kind of an idea that kind of got born out of one of our team members who happened to be an intern, and he didn't have Wi-Fi in his location. So he got a Wi-Fi hotspot and put a tent up in his backyard so he can get a signal. That was the only place he could get a signal, and took a picture of it and told us his story and submitted. And we were like, whoa, this is a moment. And so we then started soliciting moments to the point where we had, Emma Whitthorpe, our chief HR officer, sending in a picture of giving haircuts to her boys, our Stephanie Moody with her kids' prom, just over and over again. And it has just been not only engaging and connected us internally when we're all separate, but it's actually kind of humanized us as a company to our external audiences.
Yeah, my favorite was when we couldn't bring the kids to Mercury, we brought Mercury to the kids. We replaced your take our daughters and sons to work day. So I thought that was tremendous.
Well, I love it because our CEO challenged us. He said, hey, it's bring your kids to work day. We're going to have to take that off the calendar. And I'm like, oh no, we're not going to take it off the calendar. We're going to change it up. So that was a great opportunity to flip it around.
Yeah, I went to your webpage. You had a personal message from him and you had links to some virtual tours and educational resources. So I thought that was a fantastic idea. Jill, what have you seen as examples with other high-tech companies?
Here, I thought we could take a look at what social media campaigns have been successful. We're really seeing that the best performing pieces of content right now are the ones that have relatable messages and focus on strengthening the brand's community. For instance, a simple thank you to essential workers, those in healthcare, retail, others on the front lines, or posts that show appreciation for their employees and small businesses in their communities. These types of posts really show that companies are putting the focus on their people rather than the company's products and services. As we move forward, I think we'll continue to see this, but we'll also see sprinkled in those more business as usual posts and activities. But it will be a delicate balance for quite some time. I just love that example you just shared of Mercury highlighting Take Your Kids to Work Day. It's so relatable for a lot of people right now. It's, take your kids to work, school, and everywhere else you go. So that's a great example.
Stephanie, back to you. It seems like you have blended your internal communications and external, and you're kind of empowering your employees. Did you have a certain focus you were doing to, target that?
I've been a long-standing believer in integrated communications, particularly in the digital age where, you no longer control your message. You really have to speak with one voice. Given that and given my sort of bias towards integrated comms, it's always been internal first. And we've taken internal comms and we've been extending our actions and strategies into external stakeholder messaging. And as I think Jill just said, it is more connected than ever in this environment. I think we all feel like we're going through this together. And so there's some commonality. And if you can kind of get to the heart of it and really be authentic, I think Vanessa mentioned that, that really does, that connection starts to resonate. The other thing we've done is what I would call flattened our communications. We were really struggling at Mercury, as many companies do. We're not huge, 2,000 employees, plus or minus, but we were really having trouble breaking down layers and getting through. So what this crisis forced us to do is to just go directly to the managers and start with a weekly call and not only engage them at a more frequent cadence, like I mentioned earlier, but actually hold them accountable to communicating the message and really put them in a spot where they had all the tools. And then what we would do in return was take immediate action on what they needed. And so it became this virtuous cycle of building trust and accountability. So I know I probably went a little bit off on your answer, but I think those two things, like internal and external and the blurring of the lines, and really empowering our 300 managers to share transparently with their team, it's been incredibly powerful.
That's great advice. Jill, when things do open back up, how will you advise companies to change anything in their messaging and branding efforts, or will it kind of continue?
My advice would be to proceed with optimistic caution. The light switch won't all of a sudden be switched fully on. So circling back to the point I made earlier, I would really encourage companies to take the pulse on who they're communicating to, whether it's the media, their employees, customers, partners, other stakeholders. And once that is done, they'll have a better understanding of how to adjust their messaging and branding efforts. But it's really a learning process as we all go along.
Stephanie, how about you? When things open back up, will you change the way you're messaging and branding?
We probably will. I imagine we will. It's a new world. It's still evolving, but we believe our strategies are the right ones. So from that standpoint, we don't expect those to change dramatically. The key, I think, again, is to lead from the front, anticipate what our stakeholders, where they're going to be, and week to week, And so from my standpoint, just continue to try to play ahead, stay tuned in and flexible.
Vanessa, everybody kind of prepares for crisis communications, but how should we go forward into the future, prepare ourselves for things like this that are kind of unexpected?
Well, Pat, actually, I would say that very few companies prepare themselves for crisis communications. it's a very underserved segment of communications, unfortunately. And we've been telling all of our clients always that they should have something in place. But this is a perfect opportunity to say that this is the time more than ever to establish a crisis communications protocol within your company. And that way, when something unexpected happens, you already have a plan in place that outlines who's in charge, what steps need to be taken, which stakeholder groups need to be addressed, what content needs to be written for internal or external communications, who needs to approve that messaging, and so on and so forth. It will greatly reduce the panic that can arise when something happens, and everybody will know exactly what needs to be done. When it comes to this current crisis, which is so unique and so ubiquitous, we encourage everyone to thoroughly examine how COVID has been affecting their businesses, and not just whether sales are up or down, but which steps they took or didn't take, which messages seemed to succeed or fail, which stakeholder groups needed the most attention and encouragement, which actions, seem to keep everybody engaged or not, and so on. From there, you can develop an outline of actions that should help you decide how you're going to weather future eventualities. And I'd really like to emphasize something that Jill has touched on and that Stephanie was talking about a moment ago. Internal communications are so important to a successful business. Your employees should be the first ones that you reach out to with news that's either good or bad or somewhere in between. So make sure that you are putting them first as a priority, because they're the ones that are making your business run on a day-to-day basis, and you need their loyalty and advocacy, and there's no better way to earn that than to keep them informed and keep them engaged.
Excellent. Well said. I appreciate everybody's expert advice during this session. So I'd like to thank Stephanie, Vanessa, and Jill for giving us their advice today. Look for our next episode in the Marketing in the Age of COVID-19 series, Getting the Word Out, We Are Ready to Ship, as we'll be taking a look at how companies are distancing in the workplace and how they're communicating the status of their business. We'll see you next time. Thank you.